joining us today, participating in the conference, and looking forward to a great discussion.
Thanks so much, Josh. I'm so excited to be here. It's been a great conference so far. So I'm by the way, I'm Adam Sachs, founding CEO of Vicarious Surgical. Just a little bit of background about me. I'm a roboticist and biomedical engineer. I studied at MIT, same as my co-founder, Sami Khalifa, and we both worked at Apple for a little while, but pretty quickly decided that this company was our passion and started this company 7 years ago, and I've been working on it ever since. And it's been an incredible thrill the past few months to be able to take what we've been working on in the background in stealth for a long time, and really be able to share it with the world. So I'm excited for today. I think we've also prepared a short video as well for those who haven't seen it that we can share. Josh, is it okay if we just kick that off?
That'd be great. I think it'll just help us kind of start to give a foundation and help us understand visually some of the highly differentiated unique features and capabilities of the Vicarious surgical system. So that's a great start, and then we can dive into some of the other topics.
All right.
At Vicarious Surgical, we are connecting advanced miniature robotics, computer science, and 3D visualization to build a new category of intelligent and affordable single-incision surgical robots. It's the unprecedented ability to work downward, sideways, as well as up, and even control. The result is a user experience where the surgeon feels transported with a system instrumented for advanced sensing, data collection, and artificial intelligence. Surgeons will be able to avoid.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Adam. That, I think, demonstrated a number of the differentiating features and capabilities of the system. And maybe to just expand on that, if you could, just and maybe verbalize it, stamp in some of those features that we just saw, and maybe compare them to some of the shortcomings of the legacy surgical robotic systems and what Vicarious surgical robot is solving for, relative to the incumbents in the space right now.
Yeah, for sure. So I think it's actually pretty helpful if I can to take a step back even to before surgical robots to open surgery. So, open surgery is, of course, the original way that surgery is performed, where a surgeon takes a scalpel and quite literally opens up the patient, where we're talking about abdominal surgery here. So opens up the patient's abdomen. They can see with their own eyes. They can operate with their own hands. But unfortunately, about 20% of open surgery patients end up with complication. It's a failure of the incision to heal properly that ends up resulting in the patient needing an additional surgical procedure to correct that. So that's what minimally invasive surgery is all about. That's what existing surgical robots are all about. The idea that if you make 3 to 5 small incisions in the patient's abdomen, they heal much more readily, driving complications from 20% down to 1%. But unfortunately, they also require the surgeon to triangulate from multiple incisions to a single point in the abdomen. So when you talk about some of the challenges of legacy surgical robots, it really is about the setup and the fact that, to me as a roboticist, what this all means is that the surgeon needs to define the kinematic profile of the robot for every procedure based on where they put the incisions, because the motion is pivoting about the incision sites and based on where they want to operate. So there have been some companies that have come out with single port robots as well, with the vision that if you put everything in through one incision, then you get away from a lot of these complications. But unfortunately, with those single port robots, you end up with a number of other challenges because they're all built on flexible robotics technology. So they all have incisions that are too big at 25 millimeters, 2.5 centimeters or greater, leading to complication rates that are almost 10%, starting to get back up toward open surgery. And they also have very tiny operating areas and low forces and very limited capability. So the result of all of this is that 2 decades into robotics and 4 decades into minimally invasive surgery, we're doing mostly open surgery with only 3.2% of surgery being performed with robotic technique today. So we really believe that in order to get past this, we need something that it really doesn't just solve 1 or 2 of the challenges, but that there are 5 or 10 major challenges with robotics today. Everything from cost, ergonomics, workflow of setup, workflow during the procedure, and all of these really add up quickly. And we really believe you need to solve all of them to actually achieve widespread adoption of surgical robotics.
Oh, that's great to just more foundational info for this discussion. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, sorry. Do you want me to dive into what we're doing?
Yes, absolutely.
So our system is essentially when we started this company 7 years ago, we realized pretty quickly that we had this vision. It is based on the movie Fantastic Voyage. It was the inspiration for this. I don't know if I haven't shared that I don't think publicly with anyone, but it's this movie from, I think it was the 60s, where surgeons or doctors are shrunk down, it's sci-fi, and injected into the body of a patient so that they're the perfect size to operate. And that's been the vision, but we pretty quickly realized that there was no robotic technology that could achieve that. That flexible robots are both too large and too weak and have too little mobility, and multi-port robots, rigid robots have something called coupled motion. So every joint that you move in a rigid surgical robot also moves all the other joints. And what that means is that you end up with this exponential buildup of force joint by joint as you go through the arm. That's why legacy surgical robots are stuck with just a wrist inside the abdomen, just 3 degrees of freedom with 1 millimeter diameter steel control cables. Whereas we've fully decoupled the motion. We have 9 degrees of freedom inside the body with 0.5 millimeter diameter slippery polymer cables, vastly improving the surgeon's capability and allowing them to work anywhere from any incision site facing in any direction, all through a 15 millimeter or 1.5 centimeter incision. But also at the same time, significantly reducing the cost and complexity of the system overall.
So solving a number of the challenges that you listed, but it is remarkable about how long robotics have been in play and just low single-digit penetration of the market opportunity. And obviously, as these challenges are solved, we expect, and your team expects, that there will be deeper penetration with robotic systems. And I know your team has done some market research work and just thinking about the pent-up demand for robotics that's out there, thinking about that low single-digit penetration that you cited. Do you think the pent-up demand for a new system will come from current robotic users that are looking for a better platform, or non-users, or maybe a mixture of both?
Yeah. This is a really good question. So it's one that we spend a lot of time thinking about. I'll say, but before I answer it, I'd also like to note that, I think there's kind of two questions, right? There's what the demand is and also what we're targeting. And I think there's demand from both of those. But, at the end of the day, the incumbents here have 3% of the market, and they're doing good minimally invasive surgery. Over 50% of the market is open surgery. So, from an ethical opportunity, a financial opportunity, I think all of the clear opportunity in front of us is primarily in non-robotic procedures, that we are, procedures that would have been done with large incisions and open surgery that we can move and convert away to robotic surgery, growing the whole market rather than fighting, frankly, with large incumbents over the 3% slice. That being said, I think the answer is both. There is demand in both. Existing surgical robots are priced at a huge premium, and that premium pricing has led to some amount of existing demand and hospitals that have been unable to acquire the technology due to cost. But also there's sort of this huge ring as we look at it. You have the center of hospitals that have a few robots, and then out of that is hospitals with one robot, and then there's this very large slice of hospitals and surgical practices that are completely non-robotic today. And that's our main focus, and that's where a huge amount of the demand in our market research has been.
Oh, that makes a ton of sense. And thinking about the challenges and the shortcomings of some of the incumbent systems, there have been some public comments by some new players, particularly Johnson & Johnson and Medtronic, about their development programs and for their surgical robotic platforms. There's not a ton in the public domain, but just in terms of what your team has learned or you've learned, and thinking about the advantages of the Vicarious surgical robot to current systems, how confident are you that those advantages will still hold up against what's in development or what's coming down from the pipelines of some of these either incumbents or new entrants into the space?
Yeah, it's so I think that there's a few different paths of development here that are all relevant. We're fortunate to be in a space where, well, in some ways fortunate for this question, where it's 5 to 10 year development cycle. And therefore, you can get very good insight into what competitors are doing with intellectual property, as well as, with, of course, their public disclosures in the case of a number of these companies. So I think we have pretty good insight and knowledge and have, multiple full-time people who track this stuff. So the new entrants we primarily categorize into two categories. One is multi-port systems that, we believe are primarily targeting Intuitive's market. So there are a few of these that are good examples. I think that the two that you mentioned, J&J and Medtronic, are both in that camp. They are, multi-port surgical robots that are targeting that couple percent slice, for a variety of reasons. I think one could reasonably assume significantly due to revenue loss around consumables. The rest of them which is a much, much smaller group, is targeting doing, single port approaches. And most of those are based on flexible robotic techniques as well. So they're large incision. The smallest of them that we've seen is 25 millimeters. They go up from there. And they have limited capability. We're not aware of anybody else with anywhere near the ability to operate that we have. Those 9 degrees of freedom, 28 sensors in each arm, measuring force and position at every joint, and our cost structure that comes from those decoupled actuators.
Excellent. And I think one of the interesting elements of the Vicarious surgical story, or intriguing elements, I should say, more than interesting, is just the talent that you've been able to recruit. Some of the investors that have come in private rounds. But maybe you can talk about how you build out your team. And I mean, clearly, we usually think about veteran players in the medtech space joining the efforts of a company as a validation signal. And maybe you can talk about the team that you built out and how validating you believe their joining has been for you.
Yeah, I personally consider this my main role, right? It's there's a couple things that I think are my role, but the biggest chunk is building out and growing an amazing team that can execute on our vision. And I think, like you said, the experience level of the members of the team is something that is incredibly important, especially in such a nuanced and complex industry. That there's huge advantage to having a decade plus, including multi-decade experience levels in individuals in a company. So everything from our existing investor base of really incredible investors, including former Oris investors, and all the way through our executive chairman David Steika, who is an operational leader at Oris for a long time, all the way through their $6 billion acquisition by J&J, having Paul Hermes, who ran the entire Medtronic robotics program, as one of our key advisors. And then our core leadership team is primarily split between public company experience as we go public. Of course, that's incredibly important. Both GC and CFO for medical devices, I should note. And then the rest is robotics experience, kind of married with medical device expertise. So, we've been able to pull incredible industrial roboticists, leaders from a variety of medical device companies who have worked on other surgical robots before. And frankly, this incredible team, the entire technical side led by my co-founder, Sammy, is really what's allowed us to execute over the last 7 years.
Excellent. Going back to the system, and one of the capabilities is the data collection during the procedure. Your team has talked about, and maybe help us better understand the value of these data, your strategy to leverage these data to enhance the offering. And one of the things that we've heard from Vicarious as well as other robotics or teams is that this data could eventually allow intraoperative surgeon feedback. I mean, is that the primary payoff of this kind of data capturing initiative? And what else could we see evolve in the platform through this data capture?
Yeah. So, obviously for any company today, data is an incredibly important part of the mission. I will say, I think a lot of people a lot of other companies have looked at ways to add data capture into their platforms rather than build their platforms around data capture, which, it can provide something, but is much, much more limiting than actually building a platform truly around data capture. And, the goals of data capture are there are a few goals here. First is intraoperative feedback, like you mentioned. So, we measure force and position at every joint in real time in the body. We have 28 sensors per arm compared to 0 for essentially everybody else. And we've as you can tell from the image behind me, have broken away from chip on a stick, where we're trying to cram as much sensing as we possibly can in the very tip of a laparoscope. We have this wide pill that has 2 eyes placed far apart, 3 LEDs per eye with adjustable multispectrum imaging. We have the ability, we map everything in 3D in real time. So we measure every force, every position, every movement of the tissue, all in real time during the procedure. And we use this to provide the surgeon feedback during the operation, giving them, intraoperative feedback to allow them to do better procedures. But I think that the more important piece is the long-term vision that we really believe in and we're aiming for. So we really believe that, long-term, there is an attainable goal of automation in surgery that is frankly much closer than a lot of other types of automation. So if you look at something like a self-driving car, the real value of a self-driving car is only realized when you completely remove the human from driving the car. But that's not true in surgery. In fact, a huge chunk of the value is realized just by removing 30 minutes of the surgeon's time and letting a physician's assistant perform that part of a procedure. And adding automation and safety can enable this in a way that is a lot closer than I think a lot of people imagine. Yes, true automation, no human in the OR of surgery. I'm not sure I'm going to see that in my lifetime. But removing the surgeon for portions of the procedure, similar model to anesthesia that's already being implemented today, is entirely achievable in the relatively near future. But to bring it back to your question here, what it requires is the proper data capture. We really believe, to kind of use this metaphor to its limit, that a lot of the other surgical robotics companies are trying to automate a Toyota Camry. And really, you need to build out the LiDAR, the radar, the computer vision, all of the sensing for us, the force feedback and positional feedback in real time, in order to collect the data that you need, both in a big data sense, so that we can make the correct decisions and couple it to outcomes, but also intraoperatively, so that the system can make real-time choices as it proceeds, and with the same information that we're giving to the surgeon.
That's a great download. Feeds right into our conference theme of the future health, future of robotics. But there's a lot in the pipeline, it sounds like, over with your team at Vicarious Surgical. We talked about a validation signal earlier with just you building out your team, and many of them in the Vicarious story. But your system achieved breakthrough designation. It was granted by the FDA. The only surgical robotic system that has been given a breakthrough designation by the FDA. I'm just curious how deeply did the agency delve into the development details of the Vicarious surgical robot to make the assessment, and what steps did Vicarious take to get that designation?
Yeah, so it's to achieve a breakthrough designation, you need a number of things, but it's primarily focused around being able to achieve better clinical outcomes in a life-saving or meaningfully life-improving way due to the fundamentals of your technology. So we had to prove to the agency both pieces of that. So what that meant for us is demonstrating, with primarily existing clinical data, the relatively poor outcomes of existing abdominal wall reconstruction, which is a huge market, almost 1 million cases per year in the United States alone. And then most of them are repaired with technique that results in 20% recurrence. So we are able to do a technique that results in much, much lower recurrence, down to at most 4% from 20%, in a technique that is practical and cost-effective for surgeons. And that is due to the flexibility, to those 9 degrees of freedom, due to the decoupled actuator. So, in the review, the agency wants to know the clinical benefits, but then they also dug into why we're able to achieve those clinical benefits, and understanding that it's not some small change that we made, but rather it's a major architectural change based on a fundamental technology difference. So we demonstrated all of that to the agency, and they agreed.
Excellent. And just sounds like your team has been keeping tabs as we suspected, and maybe have some deeper diligence than we would have understood before this discussion. But just knowing what you know about some of the pipeline robots out in the space, would you expect the Vicarious surgical robot to remain as the sole robotic surgery system with this breakthrough designation, and why or why not?
It's something that we think about. I disappointingly don't really have the answer. I'll say that there are other novel robotics platforms out there. Most of the interesting novel ones are, they, like, whether or not they achieve breakthrough designation, they might, because they're, even if we're much further along than they are developing interesting things. Most of them, or every single one that we've seen, is targeting a small separate niche market, though. There are some for stroke, for example, or things that are in very different markets than we're looking. And those are where a lot of these more interesting opportunities that we've seen lie.
Great. Well, your Vicarious surgery's or surgical's first indication is ventral hernia repair, and how do you think potential early adopters of your system will think about the system's full spectrum of utility upon commercialization of this first indication? Will the pathway be apparent when making the initial adoption decision, not just for the surgeon, but for the hospital's value analysis committee and its C-suite decision makers? It sounds like what you presented to the FDA continue to build even more data, but just wanted to get a sense of, as you get approval and thinking about the commercial execution stage, how will you guys pave that path to get through these committees and drive adoption?
Yeah, so it's an incredibly important piece of any adoption, and it's kind of one of the things that I talk about when I say checking like all the boxes for the surgeon, the patient, and the hospital. Getting VACs have increasing influence and power in a hospital, and are an incredibly important piece of our healthcare system. So in order to justify a purchase, there are a good number of centers that we believe just around ventral hernia have the volume to justify purchase, right? It's not, out of the 80,000 operating rooms in the United States or approximately, it's nowhere near that number, right? But is it enough to, fuel our first year or two of growth? Absolutely it is. Talking about a total of a bit over 100 units in the first 2 years. That being said, ventral hernia is just a stepping stone, and we're making it very clear to hospitals and surgeons who are investing their capital and time into our technology that we are developing additional indications, and within a year we'll launch multiple additional tools and multiple additional indications to be able to do not only multiple things in general surgery but gynecology as well.
Great to hear. And then just with some of that development work on maybe the tool side, anything you can share about timing of the commercialization of specifically clips and vessel sealing, or any other tools and effectors that you want to talk about, or maybe too early to discuss now?
Clips and vessel sealing, or 2024? 2024.
Great. The manufacturing, the fully disposable, sterile portion of the system. You've talked in the public domain about just the manufacturing costs relative to other systems being much lower, and as your competitors continue to try and drive cost efficiency in their manufacturing process, how big of a delta do you think is in place now, and where Vicarious are going to maintain that cost of goods advantage, or just low manufacturing cost advantage well into the out years?
So, but there's the two pieces of this are CapEx and consumables, right? And I think your question is more on consumables, but our CapEx is an incredible cost advantage that's fundamental to the architecture of the capital equipment. We have, we take 4 giant industrial robots and turn it into a primarily non-robotic support structure because of the amount of capability that we've moved inside of the body. So conservatively, the cost is 5 to 10x lower for our capital. And that's comparing, mass production for, our competition to our cost today for the systems in our office today. That being said, consumables are, less of a night and day order of magnitude difference, but still a pretty significant fundamental difference because of the decoupling. Because we've removed that exponential buildup of force, we not only use high performance polymer cables, but also parts throughout the arms. The metal parts are primarily just bearings and pins here and there, as well as the very tips of the end effector. And the rest are made out of high performance polymers that are 3D printed and injection molded. So our cost structure and cost advantage is pretty significant. We're leveraging it, though, primarily for the disposable aspect rather than just recouping all of the financial reward for ourselves to make hospitals' lives easier and decrease our barrier to adoption. Now, I'll say that gives us a huge window if competitors come out with lower cost instruments for us to go with a reposable model similar to competitors if we ever wanted to, and capture nearly an additional 10x cost benefit there. But it is always available. We'd prefer to keep the disposable model, though.
A lot of optionality there, but a favorable setup, it sounds like. And sticking on just the as you guys are thinking about the commercialization stage, the international opportunity, it's the first indication, annual case volumes for shoulder repair outside the U.S. is much bigger than U.S. volumes. And how do you think about the international opportunity and the balancing, the thrust into the U.S.? At what point does global expansion make the most sense for Vicarious surgical?
So the international opportunity is pretty incredible, especially the opportunity in Asia is probably one of the most interesting out of all. We're doing U.S. first, but in our formal timeline, we are launching internationally about 2 years after our initial launch. One of the reasons, though, that we're incredibly excited to be partnering with D8 is because of their deep experience and connections in medical devices in Asia. So we're currently in conversations with a number of people that they've introduced us to, talking about ways that we can bring clearances in Asia forward significantly, as well as commercial launch forward. It's a huge market opportunity. It's 3 or 4 times the U.S. market opportunity total. So we're incredibly excited about it, even if our plan of record is U.S. That being said, even by 2027, with the financials that we've publicly shared, the mix is still over 90% U.S. revenue.
Great. And just thinking again out into the commercial era, how should investors think about reimbursement dynamics for the use of Vicarious surgical robot? And, any advantages or disadvantages relative to the incumbent robotic systems that could be in play?
So reimbursement is one of the more interesting dynamics of surgical robots. As you know, it's there are kind of 2 ways to look at this. So one is the conventional way of getting a code specifically for your technology, or actually more applicably, more accurately, a procedure that's performed with your technology. That has not been achieved generally with surgical robots. That's been tried and not been successful. I'll say we do have a window at this because of the combination of our clinical benefit that led to the breakthrough designation and the breakthrough designation itself as well. But it's not our plan of record, and we're including none of those assumptions in our anything that we do, or any of the decisions that we make. The main way that this is reimbursed is via the procedures that it performs under existing codes for those procedures. So ventral hernia repair is a really good example. Simple hernia repair is reimbursed surgeon plus hospital payment in an outpatient setting with Medicare at about $5,000, and you can bump that up well over $10,000 by doing an advanced abdominal wall repair. Unfortunately, though, the time it takes and the tools and the consumables that you use with today's techniques more than eat up that cost differential and make it a significant negative ROI for most hospitals. So with our technology and our platform, we can do that advanced abdominal wall reconstruction in a similar amount of time to the simple hernia repair, generating much better reimbursement and revenue for the hospital, all with better outcomes for the patient. And that's how we think about it today, rather than fighting for additional codes, which has been fought and lost by our competitors, focusing on existing coding and fitting into better procedure options within those existing codes.
I appreciate that. Yeah, that's an interesting dynamic, just being able to enable surgeons to do more complex surgery more efficiently and effectively, and then just capturing that higher reimbursement that's already in play. That's a dynamic I hadn't thought all the way through, but thanks for sharing that. I wanted to spend some time here as we're moving through the end of the discussion, just on the regulatory paths, and talking about that after the commercialization era is it's a little, the chronology isn't perfect here, but wanted to ask about just the 510K pathway that Vicarious Surgical was pursuing. I know a competitor in the field indicated last year that they were shifting to the de novo clearance pathway, de novo 510K, and just maybe discuss the regulatory path Vicarious Surgical was on relative to that competitor, and why that path makes sense for your team.
Yeah, so we've all seen the agency kind of become increasingly strict, and we have an amazing regulatory team internally, some external advisors, external counsel. I mean, we've no shortage of people who've literally cleared surgical robots through the FDA working with us. And our analysis is that the main thing that the FDA has been frustrated with and cracking down on is broad clearances. It's general tools claims, or even general abdominal tools claims, anything that is particularly broad rather than narrow and procedure specific. So we believe that with the 510K pathway, we can get through to clearance with for ventral hernia repair, and frankly ventral hernia repair alone, due to that the hazards analysis and risk profile of our technology. And that's always what it comes down to. I will say that while we're confident that we can prove our device is safe and effective prevention hernia repair. With that, at the end of the day, the FDA makes the decision on clearance, and we will provide the agency with the information they need to make that decision. So worst case scenario, though, these are typically very small clinical trials, and they take a couple of months, not multi-years, in order to complete. Now, there's an exception to that, and the exception is, like our competitors, if you want to start, instead of doing indication by indication, as you can see on our website, just kicking it right off with a broad general abdominal tools claim. And that's what the agency has said that they want a ton of additional clinical data for. So there is an option to provide that, but through a much more complex regulatory pathway. And as a small company with such a clear ability to have a mandate in one indication, especially an indication with a pretty safe risk profile, we're excited to target that first and appeal to the FDA, and we'll be comfortable with that.
Great. And just thinking about the V&V and other data that you'll collect for the U.S. submission, are any help just thinking about the size of the data set, how many patients will be needed in the data collection, and will your team share this data at some point before commercial launch or after submission or in conjunction with submission?
We will probably share a chunk of the data. When exactly, I'm not sure, but it frequently is important to supporting a commercial launch. And we intend to do some post-market studies as well in order to collect additional data to support our launch. There's a lot of pieces of V&V, right? Everything from EMC testing to summative. I think that the most interesting piece is not all the lab bench and testing that we have to do, which is a ton. Everything from biocompatibility, sterility, the list goes on and on. But the most interesting to me is summative testing. So summative is novice meaning not novice to our technology, operative teams, a minimum of 15 subjects, and bringing these teams through our training, giving them a decay period to quite literally forget our training. And then they have to use our device safely and correctly throughout a procedure entirely on their own without our support. And that's what's really validating, right? When we talk about, the second V, it really is to me that the most meaningful validation is that you can do everything. You can do the training, and then without additional support in the operating room, they can use our technology and our robot to perform an effective procedure.
Excellent. Maybe just to we can end here. We have one minute plus left, but just maybe always great to hear from surgeons. I know this may be through Vicarious Surgical's lens, but just the feedback you've gotten to date and the current surgeon interest in participating in some of this development work that we just talked about. Maybe you could just share some anecdotal feedback and just surgeon interest level, and that'd be a great place to end the discussion.
Yeah, so my favorite feedback is when we hear, which we do, can I use this today? That is a question that we get, and it's an awesome question. And the answer is always, no, we need to ensure that we go through the correct process and pathway here. But we've also done extensive market research, 20 surgeons plus 20 hospital administrators in a blinded study that was run by one of the leading firms in the industry. And we actually, when we kicked this off, we never even intended to share it. It was for our own research. But the results were incredible. We were 95th percentile in numeric ranking for any study performed by this firm. We were ranked a 4.8 out of 5 against manual minimally invasive surgery and a 4.2 out of 5 against legacy surgical robots. And ratings above 4 are in the category that they call very easy sell and major technological breakthrough.
That's fantastic feedback. And it brings us right up to the end of the session here. Can't thank you enough for joining our Future Health Conference this year. Looking forward to your participation in future Cowen events down the line. I learned a lot today, and we're very excited to continue to follow along with the progress. Thank you, the Vicarious team, and the attendees, the investor attendees that dialed in. But everyone have a great rest of the day. Adam, thanks again.
Thanks so much, John.